What's happening, people? Welcome back this week with By Spear and Axe. I'm Tom, and I am going to talk about the Cold Steel Synthetic Longsword. I picked up 3 of these several years ago when my son and I first started looking at studying HEMA. We had just gone to see The Last Jedi. We're having a bite to eat, and I looked at him and said, you know, that was pretty cool, but do you want to learn how to sword fight for real? And he looked at me, and being a teenager, he was cool, calm, and reserved. Oh, yeah. Okay, my son's a dork. But he's my son, what do you expect? Anyways, though, I picked up 2 of these right away, one for me, one for him. Then his mother said, what about me? So I picked up a 3rd. I've had these, for, like I said, for several years, and recently we've put some more time in with these swords. I had time before, after looking at some books and trying to make things work. There were some problems that I can talk about some other time, but the problem wasn't the sword. So I figured I've had them long enough. Let's do a little bit of a review. Alright, so the first thing I want to talk about with this is price. And I'm going to start there because that's actually the best feature of the sword overall. You can get this on Amazon for about $40. I'm going to have an affiliate link in the description below if you want to pick one up. And there's just really not a lot that I've seen that falls into this category. I was actually looking for a wooden waster at the time, but the price on this was just too attractive, and for 40 bucks, since I had to get 3 of them, one for me, one for my son, and then his mother said, well, what about me? So that meant 3. But still, you know, at the time they were about 35, so for 105 bucks, I got practice swords for the entire family. That's really hard to beat, even today. Like I said, it's a little more expensive, but not horribly so. I mean, it's gone up in $5 in the last few years. It's not bad. It's easily the best feature, and if you're on a budget, this is probably one of the better options. Alright, so now we're going to talk a little bit about weight. A while back, someone referred to one of these swords as being basically a sword-shaped kettlebell. And I kind of get that because, well, they're black. And when you buy a kettlebell, it's typically black. Unless you paint up your kettlebells like I do. But that's neither here nor there. It was a comment about the weight mostly, though, and I don't think that was particularly fair. I put this on the scale. I've got an Asari food scale. I set it up, put the sword down hilt first, just kind of balanced it, and ended up with a grand total of 2 pounds. A historic longsword, it runs around 3 pounds, so it's a pound lighter. Sounds to me like this is not a particularly heavy sword. Is it heavier than some other synthetic swords? Yeah, probably. But it's not particularly heavy in general, so I don't really agree with that assessment. But it is 2 pounds, and there's some things that make it feel a good bit heavier, and we'll get to those here in a minute. But 2 pounds, really not awful. If you think 2 pounds is too heavy, then you definitely don't need to be dealing with steel ever, in my opinion. You definitely don't want to try test cutting with a real sword, especially one made to, historic specifications, because this is actually lighter. Okay, so the next bit we want to talk about is balance, and the balance on these isn't great in my opinion. This is the balance point of, it's right about here, which, as you can see, is about 2.5 hands-ish up the blade, which makes this kind of tip heavy. And so what happens is you end up with those 2 pounds of weight, which is higher than a lot of other swords apparently, and you end up with more of it towards the tip. And that is not good. What it does is it means when you do swing this, you're moving that weight at a greater arc. It's having more distance, more velocity where that aim, and means you're going to hit a lot harder. And that's something we're going to get into a little bit later. but that balance is not great. Like I said, it doesn't inhibit you doing things like, you know, the guards, all that stuff, it works fine for that. But what it doesn't work fine for is, when you're trying to swing it and not hurt the guy in front of you. And that's something, like I said, I will get into here in a little. Alright, so next we're going to talk a little bit about the edge. And you can't really see it at this angle. I'll try to get a close-up of it here in a little bit. But the way this sword is shaped, it comes down into an edge right here. And that's kind of a problem for any practice sword because of physics. Basically what happens is the way a period sharp sword would work is it's basically a wedge. If you remember simple machines from like elementary school and stuff. It's a wedge. It takes all that force and it puts it on a very small point and pushes things away. Well, while this isn't necessarily sharp, the blade, as you might be able to see, kind of tapers down into a little bit of an edge right along here. And so it takes that 2 pounds of tip-heavy force and puts it on a very small point that hurts. Okay, the more I hit myself in the leg with this earlier, and yeah, I could kind of feel a little bit of pain. It wasn't awful pain. It wasn't unbearable pain. I didn't consider myself injured, but it wasn't particularly pleasant. Also along the edge is right here at this point at the tip. It's not particularly rounded. It's a little round-ish. You're not going to drive it into a piece of wood or anything, but since thrusting is a part of HEMA, this is not going to be pleasant to get thrusted with. So the edge, all of that stuff really is a huge down factor for me. Enough so that I personally would not want to spar with this weapon, much at all. All right, see that bend? No, you don't really see it. That's good because it's not freaking there. Okay, this thing has almost no flexibility, which means if you thrust somebody with it, it's going to hurt a lot. Now again, if it's somebody in armor, probably not going to be that big of a deal. They're not going to find it particularly pleasant, but it's not going to injure them. If you're dealing with somebody in just a gambeson or a fencing jacket, even a heavy sparring jacket, this is going to be bad for them, I would think. When you couple the fact that it has no bend, it's got this point that I talked about earlier, it's bad for flex. It's bad for thrusts if you're the other guy. Now, if you actually want to hurt somebody, I guess this would be a good way to do it. But if you want to hurt somebody, I don't want to spar with you, period. I don't care what kind of sword you have. And that is a big downplay to the point that this is just pain waiting to happen. Alright, so next we're going to talk about the looks of it, because let's face it, nobody wants an ugly weapon. And there were some things that Cold Steel did really well as far as looks go. For example, they made the hilt look very much like what you would expect to see on a period sword. The grip, you've got the ferrules, the faceted scent stopper pommel. On the blade, you've got the taper like you would see, it comes to the point like you would see. It has a fuller, it's got a ricasso. They took some really good steps to try to make it at least look appealing. And then they did this. Why? It's like they figured, well, we can't make it anything but a big block of plastic, so we're just going to make it look like a big block of plastic. I get that they were going to use a rubber piece to kind of fasten this on into place, but you would think they could have at least taken a few minutes to make this look like proper quillions, but they didn't. And that kind of lets down, because now that impacts the function. For example, if you try to put a finger over the quillions, like some people do, like was done in period, this is not pleasant. This is not exactly a pleasant way to hold a sword. But on the same token, because of these fake ferrules here that are actually at about a 90-degree angle to the grip itself, it's not real pleasant to hold in general. If you try to take kind of a handshake grip and then put your other hand down, there's not a lot of space. And while you can do some things with it, it's not exactly a pleasant experience. It's not unbearably unpleasant, but that is something else that kind of works against it, which is a shame because they actually did put some thought into this. They didn't just make a sword-shaped object and call it done. They actually tried to make it look sword-like. But then it was like whoever designed this part, you know, who designed the actual cleans themselves, it was like somebody said, we need that design like now, and he had 5 minutes to come up with a design. This is the best he can do. I mean, that's the only thing I can think of. So that's the downside of it. Alright, so overall impressions of this. Obviously, I'm pretty down on it in a lot of ways, and I think for some pretty good reasons. But it's not that nobody should ever have it. I mean, it's a $40 practice sword. If you need several practice swords for new people who aren't going to be sparring or just going to be learning the basics, maybe doing a few drills, you could do worse than this, especially if you have to buy a lot of them, you need to save money. This is not a bad way to pick them up. If you're an independent student, you're learning from a book or you're learning from a distance curriculum, you're not really going to be sparring, and yet you've got to pick up a bunch of other equipment, this is not a bad way to go either. If you're not sparring with somebody, most of the downsides are just mild annoyances at that point. But that said, I am a believer to some degree of buy once, cry once, if possible. And for just a little bit extra, you can get a better longsword. So if you're in that position where you're buying a bunch of stuff and trying to cut costs, you're not really going to cut them in the long run. You're going to end up spending way more, simply because you've now spent money on a sword you can't really use for sparring, for contact drills, and things of that sort. If you do get this, I'm not going to say you've wasted your money completely, especially if you're somebody who's not really going to have an opportunity to spar much. You know, you're not looking at tournaments, you're just wanting to learn for your own edification. You could do worse. You could really do worse. But that's really the long and the short of this one. Overall, I'm not going to recommend it for most people. Yeah, I've got a link in the description. If you want it, grab it. But I'm going to tell you truthfully, I'd save your money. There's the Rawlings swords. I'll do a review on one of those next week. I've got one too, and that's a much different animal. We'll talk more on that. You've also got the Penties, the Dark Fencer, and you know, a bunch of other synthetic brands. And honestly, most of them are going to be better off than going with this one. So until then, you guys take it easy, and we will catch you next time.